mean, it's going to be very costly for people to take advantage of this country. They can't come in and steal our money and steal our jobs and take our factories and take our businesses and expect not to be punished. And they're being punished by tariffs. It's a very powerful weapon.
Potentially a true pivot to Asia, something that the Biden administration and the Obama administration, even before them, were discussing, but never really occurred. It just never happened. It never happened whatsoever. They got totally bogged down in the Middle East because the insane policies that they were following and that they were executing on at the time led to the rise of something we call ISIS. But China, meanwhile, continued to rise and continued to encircle the globe. I famously once quipped that the tentacles of the dragon stretch far beyond Beijing, even though, dragons don't exactly have tentacles, but this one does. So when we're looking at this, when we look at Elbridge Colby and his definition of trying to contain China within the first island chain, and when we really talk economically, that's really, you put all this together, this is the connection between what President Trump is doing in terms vis-a-vis the Oval Office dispute between himself and Zelensky and J.D. Vance, as well as the tariffs. People don't think these are all connected, but they are. And we're seeing that emerging Trump doctrine through these actions. And I can only imagine that we're going to get more of that tonight in this address to Congress. Raheem, why is it that the media can't actually see the connections between all these moves?
Sorry, Jack. I mean, you lost me after a dragon with tentacles. I was just imagining that for the rest of the whole time you were talking.
It was a good one. It was one of my best.
As soon as I hop off here, I'm gonna get ChatGPT to make me an image, or Grok, to make me an image like that. Why is your question? Do they not see it like this? I don't know. In a sense, I like to blame lack of education. They don't read anything from history anymore, et cetera, et cetera. We know these things to be true. You and I talk about this offline a lot, but I actually think it's more of a lack of curiosity in general now that plagues the media class. A lot of just literalists. I mean, you saw it yesterday with, oh, J.D. Vance disses Britain with this 20,000 troop comment. No, he was abstractly talking about, like you say, any Tom, Dick, and Harry, right? Like you could go to any country in Europe to do this, or you can come and sign this mineral deal and we'll get the peace plan done. Guess what, Jack? What was the news that we heard in the break that President Trump will announce tonight at the joint session that Zelensky is actually, after all, going to sign the mineral deal? Well, again, if the British press, like it has been over the last 24 hours, want to have kittens about some throwaway comments from J.D. Vance on Fox News, over the top of a peace plan, right? They are treating that as more important than ending killing and murder and suffering and war. Then it tells you far more about them than I could possibly tell you. These now, what's interesting though? I have noticed a change, and so I don't want to be too cruel to these people. I've noticed that since Trump won in November, I would say it's not all of them. It's probably not even most of them. But I would say every 1 in 4 reporters that I now talk to, and I tell the audience this all the time, I talk to these guys every single night. The far left, the neoliberal, the neocon, the centrist, the moderate, the warmongers, you name it. They all come to the restaurant and we all have conversations all day long. And I've noticed that about 1 in 4 of them now are amenable to the idea that they have been wrong for a very long time. And that's good. That deserves reward. That deserves a pat on the back, and that deserves us taking the time out for them and saying, okay.
I have to admit, I've had a few similar conversations in that very same restaurant.
Yeah, right. And so, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but that's also not to forget that the bathwater is quite dirty.
Yes. No, and I feel what it is your typical Western upper class, upper middle class elites are probably some of the most propagandized people possibly in all of history. We'll sit and make jokes about, oh, that's like a segment from North Korean television, but we never sit and actually, to use the biblical reference, we never try to inspect the log in our own eye when it comes to our examination or re-examination of our priors or our preconceived notions. We have no theory of mind of Russia. We have no theory of mind of China. We have our own sort of caricature view that, okay, Putin is just he's just a Russian Hitler, and he's going to sweep over all of Europe, and then he's, as Zelensky himself even said, come over the ocean and attack the United States. Why? How? He can't even get past the Donbass with the current military of Russia, and yet he's also simultaneously threatening the entire world. No one's ever seemed to be able to put that together. And then we also get these notions about, it's like when I hear Zelensky saying, well, they did this and they did this, it's like when my children are fighting and, one of them will say, well, he started it and he, did this, when they're beating the crap out of each other. And I say, well, the first thing you have to do is stop fighting. And then we can have a discussion about where to go from there. But the first thing you have to do is stop fighting. And you're going to stop right now. And I don't really care who
sign this mineral deal.
And sign the mineral deal. Exactly. Which, of course, President Trump looks like he's doing. The final version, which I'm sure is going to be very similar to the one that was presented when I traveled with Scott Bessent to Kiev, I guess 3 weeks ago now, which with Zelensky threw a fit over. He just threw an absolute fit over it. And we left. we turned and walked away. No, the real idea of it is that we're going to get away from the literalists in terms of thinking that these words and these quote unquote global norms. See, that's really the big piece of it, right, Raheem? It's this idea that the Western governments exist to uphold global universal norms everywhere in the world. And that's why we have to go in and intervene in any of these countries that's not upholding norms. Oh, you're not upholding norms in Afghanistan. We've got to go to war there again for another 20 years. They're not upholding norms in, the Sudan. So we've got to get involved and split away and Darfur and everything. But of course, we'll overlook any of the countries like, Saudi Arabia, who aren't upholding any norms whatsoever because it's in our interest to do so because of the global petrodollar. But when it really comes down to it, it's President Trump and J.D. Vance looking at the world for as it is, not this figment, fantasy land kind of version of things where, and you hear Keir Starmer talking like it's 1914 and, we've got to go and fight the Tsar in the Western marches of Eurasia. Sorry, it's not Sevastopol 2.0, right? It's not going to happen. No more charge of the Light Brigade. It's done. We're not going to have that war anymore. We're not going to have that world anymore. We're going to have a serious conversation about the way the world is, because if we keep playing all those games, look, these are the same people who will sit there and say, and I'm kind of going here, but I'll cut off. These are the same people who sit there and say we must beware of entangling alliances because it was these treaties that got us into these web of entangling treaties that got us into World War I. You mean kind of like what NATO is right now?
Yeah, and the idea that NATO was supposed to be some never-ending global alliance is also a nonsense. If you look at its founding documents and the people who actually put the thing together, you wanted to get to a point where you no longer had to have it, and yet now it's its own best lobbyist, and so that will become the next target after Governor Trudeau, by the way, which is a whole nother subject. But I just want to make another point about what you're saying. Let's get back to this literalism thing. If you question to yourself, ladies and gentlemen, of the audience here, how these people can be so obtuse, you have to remember, these are the people who live in Midtown Manhattan, but attack a family who is self-subsistent, living on a farm, for daring to take one vacation a year over the interest of climate change, right? Again, these are the people who live in Midtown Manhattan, and they don't see any irony in this. For them, this is they're doing the Lord's work in their heads, right? Like it's twisted, and you'll never get those people there. But for the 25% that we mentioned earlier, Jack, I think it's interesting. Because these are not people necessarily on the fringes either. I mean, I'm talking about people in major news organizations who are coming to me and saying, hey, by the way, I definitely have it all wrong, and I want to sit down with you and pick your brain over how we don't go down that route again. They certainly are losing love for the establishment and the Democrat Party as a result of just how wrong they've had it for so very long. So while the Democrats actually, and I saw, what's his name, yesterday put out that video that said the American public is with us, standing outside the Congress, putting his blackest voice on, right? And no, he was. I mean, if a black man could do blackface, that was it, right? And they are in total disarray. The institutional Democratic Party, as people know, but I don't think people quite realize just yet how further they are yet to fall. Watch the response tonight. It is going to be childish. It is going to be tantrumy. It is going to turn the American people away from that party, even more so than Kamala and the fancy boy that ran with her.